let's discuss the catastrophic impact of economic collapse on a society. Disaster strikes in a variety of forms, such as severe and prolonged depressions, dramatic increases in bankruptcy rates, high unemployment, and even elevated mortality rates, potentially leading to a population decrease. These conditions were experienced in the 1930s Great Depression, the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany during the 1920s, and the economically induced crises in countries like the former USSR during the 1990s. When an economic collapse occurs, societies often plunge into a state of chaos with social disorder, civil unrest, and lawlessness becoming commonplace. However, the documentation of these economic implosions remains scarce. With the Great Depression standing as one of the most well-documented examples, this global crisis remains the subject of ongoing debate regarding its root causes, reinforcing the complexity and multifaceted nature of economic collapses. Historically, economic collapses often stem from a combination of political and financial challenges, including persistent trade deficits, wars, revolutions, famines, depletion of critical resources, and government-induced hyperinflation. In some instances, blockades and embargoes can lead to severe hardships akin to economic collapse. Economic collapse can also be initiated or exacerbated by the aftermath of warfare, with the cost of war often proving more detrimental than the warfare itself. Losing parties may find their currency dismissed as worthless by victorious entities, or they may face economic penalties, such as paying war reparations. In conclusion, economic collapse leaves disastrous impacts on societies, disrupting wealth and commerce, and even prompting people to invest in commodities like gold and silver during periods of war or crisis. The devastating conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh burdened the economy with blockades and instability, causing Armenia's GDP to plummet to 47th of its 1990 level by 1993. Despite these economic upheavals, the government and the Central Bank of Armenia successfully curbed hyperinflation by the mid-1990s through assertive monetary and fiscal strategies, reducing the average consumer price inflation from over 5,000 in 1994 to 175. 1995, Armenia cemented its place as a regional success story. At the height of the crisis, foreign currencies, precious metals, and jewelry transitioned into mediums of exchange. Desperate individuals sold or bartered their valuables to secure essential items. Traumatic historical events such as the German hyperinflation and the U.S. financial crisis under the Emergency Banking Act saw bonds and savings diminish in value. In extreme financial crises, governments can resort to bank holidays, conversion or confiscation of accounts, issuing a new devalued currency, and imposing capital controls restricting movement of money out of the country. Historical instances like the Taiping Rebellion that caused over 100 million deaths brought destruction to the economy, while post-World War I Germany faced political instability, hyperinflation due to debts and reparations, and strained finances, ultimately leading to the rise of the Nazi Party. However, many experts attribute the rise of Hitler and the Nazis to deflation and the Great Depression of 1929, rather than the 1923 hyperinflation. Let's discuss two key themes: the economic impact of significant market changes in the developed world, emphasizing on the Great Depression and the gold standard, and the economic stagnation and collapse of the centrally planned economies of the Eastern Bloc. In the time of the Great Depression, despite multiple bank failures, most institutions in developed nations survived, as did their governments and currencies. A monumental shift was the abandonment of the gold standard. In America, the citizens were required to exchange their gold holdings for fiat currency under the Executive Order 6102 in 1933. The exception was a reservation of 5 ounces per person. This prohibition on owning gold for monetary purposes lasted 4 decades. US dollars could be redeemed for gold by foreigners until 1971. Gold ownership in the US was not legalized until 1974. But it was not given legal tender status. Alongside this, the Depression period also experienced significant productivity growth, resulting in a rise in real wages. In stark contrast to the developed world, the Eastern Bloc that followed a highly centralized economy struggled with a decade-long stagnation during the 1980s. This led to widespread revolutions, the fall of communist regimes across Central and Eastern Europe, and ultimately the dissolution of the Soviet Union by 1991. During the 1990s, events entailed the easing of economic and political restrictions, forceful economic downfall, and implementation of shock therapy. Russia's economic crisis in 1998 was a striking instance of the bloc's struggles, with Russia's GDP at half of what it was at the beginning of the 1990s. The collapse in the USSR brought in increased death rates and escalated crime rates. Interestingly, Dmitry Orlov, who transitioned from USSR citizenship to U.S. citizenship, witnessed the economic catastrophe firsthand. Post the disintegration of the USSR, Russia faced a grave financial crisis in August 1998 due to falling oil prices and government expenditure cutbacks. This resulted in the collapse of the long-term capital management, a highly leveraged hedge fund, inducing threat to the global financial system. Consequently, the U.S. Federal Reserve organized a bailout plan, turning it over to a banking consortium. Improvement was seen in Russia subsequently. But other former Soviet Union nations continued to experience economic collapse, often accompanied with armed conflicts. In a wave of discontentment, many Argentines protested vehemently in the streets of key cities, Buenos Aires being a significant hub for such activities. This culminated in the flee of President de la Rua from the Casa Rosada on 21 December 2001. The early 2000s saw Zimbabwe gripped by an economic crisis, marked with brief seasons of partial recovery. Astonishingly, inflation hit 89.7 sextillion% in November 2008, stability only returning after the local currency was abandoned. Further monetary concerns surfaced in May 2020 when annual inflation exceeded 800 following the reintroduction of the local currency, leading to a halt in the release of government statistics. Venezuela has also been grappling with a profound crisis since 2013, primarily attributed to President Nicolás Maduro's economic policies, fluctuations in oil prices, and various other factors. This crisis is evidenced by Venezuela's GDP falling over 40, resulting in a recession. The collapse of the economy has led to shortages of basic goods, hyperinflation, an increase in crime, corruption, poverty, and hunger. As a consequence, millions of Venezuelans have sought refuge in neighboring countries. From 2008 to 2010, Latvia went through an extreme recession, with GDP declining by more than 20%. In the field of economics, a doom loop is an indicating term used to describe a negative spiral, resulting when banks hold sovereign bonds and governments bail out these banks, which can ultimately lead to economic collapse. This situation was mirrored in 2020, one when Italian and French banks increased their holdings of sovereign debt to somewhat alarming levels, prompted by stimulus spending and monetary policy. Economists, particularly from the Austrian school like Ludwig von Mises, argue that governmental interference and overregulation can create conditions for collapse. These theories do not focus on the breakdown of freely functioning financial markets, rather on economic malfunctions and crises resulting from state control. Regardless, many Austrian economists also believe in the Austrian business cycle theory, ABGIT. According to this school of thought, a boom created by malinvestments is inherently unsustainable. They argue that attempts to stimulate investment and consumption through monetary policy manipulations will ultimately collapse. This theory holds that a boom created by malinvestments, bolstering the supply of money and credit to temporarily lower interest rates, is inherently unsustainable in the long run. It contends that governments can only suppress interest rates for a limited time before fears of inflation arise, leading to a market crash or potentially hyperinflation. In his eco-philosophical theory, dubbed entropy pessimism, the scholar discusses how human activities and technologies merely accelerate the inevitable demise of our planet through the depletion of natural resources and environmental degradation, leading to a state of maximum entropy on Earth. This process is not about the creation or destruction of matter and energy, but its transformation from a state that serves human purpose, valuable resources, to a state that ceases to, waste and pollution. Correspondingly, he introduces his social concept of bioeconomics, emphasizing how human endeavors to make a living expand the biological fight for survival. This constant struggle comes to pass as an ongoing social conflict which neither human will nor societal evolution can eliminate. Thus, our biological constraints impede us from collectively sacrificing for the indefinite future generations. The pressure on Earth's resources will only intensify. The Industrial Revolution, commencing in Britain during the latter half of the 18th century, unknowingly propelled humanity onto an irreversible trajectory of resource exploitation and impending collapse in relation to Earth's mineral wealth. This trajectory suggests that despite interim growth, the world economy will eventually face a significant and final downturn post this point. Escalating scarcities will exacerbate global social strife, ultimately culminating in humanity's extinction, as speculates Georges Rogan. Named the founding father of ecological economics and a critical figure inspiring the degrowth movement, Georges Rogan's theories have led to significant explorations on the untenable allocation of Earth's finite mineral resources amongst an indeterminate number of current and future generations. As we probably cannot predict how many generations will inherit the Earth before humanity's possible extinction, any prospective resource distribution will unavoidably result in universal economic decay in the future.